My name is Samuel, and I have to confess something that still embarrasses me. I was addicted to pornography, not for weeks, not for months, but for years. A man who prayed in church, who raised his hand in worship, who said Amen, with the Bible under his arm, but who, when the family was asleep, locked himself in the bathroom with his cell phone in his hand, soiling his soul in front of a screen. I thought no one knew. I thought it was just an escape, something normal, something typical of men. But behind all that was an invisible chain, a spiritual prison, a pact with hell that I signed every night, hidden and silent. My wife slept a few feet away from me, with the Bible on her chest, praying for a home that was already rotting from the inside, and I, feeding demons with my gaze. That's what I did. I fed the evil with every click, and the more I saw, the emptier I became. The more impatient I felt, the colder I became, the more distant I became from her. I began to see my wife as a threat, as if her light exposed my darkness. Have you ever? I've been like this, living with someone who's holy while hiding rot inside. I lived like this every day, but something worse was happening, something I only understood later. I wasn't alone. There were nights when I felt a weight in my room, a presence in a dark corner, and it wasn't psychological. It was real. It was as if every time I gave in to my addiction, I opened a door for something to watch me, something that smiled as I fell. And if you think I'm exaggerating, wait until you hear what happened to me that morning. Because after years of pretending everything was okay, my heart stopped. I fell, and for 3 minutes, I was taken to a place where everything I was hiding was thrown in my face. There were no more excuses. There were no more lies. There, what I called addiction had a face and was demonic. And if all of this reminds you of anything, if in any way this type of addiction has been or still is present in your life or the life of a loved one, leave a comment. Tell me, sometimes just write, I struggle with this too. Oh, I've seen how this can destroy someone, it can break an invisible chain, and if this story has struck a chord with you, if it's made you rethink how far certain things can go, hit like and then animation. It's not just about helping the channel, but about spreading this message to more people who need to hear it before it's too late. People who are now falling into the same hole I fell into, thinking it's just a minor sin. And if you feel you need to support someone who has already gone through this, subscribe to the channel because I still have a lot to tell you, and perhaps in the midst of what's to come, you'll find just the answer you were looking for. But stay with me because if you've ever played with this kind of sin, thinking it was harmless, you'll discover it can steal all your memories. Exactly the day it all began. It was just curiosity, just one click, just one web page, nothing special, at least that's what I told myself. I was alone in my home office. Everyone was asleep, and there, in front of that illuminated screen in the darkness, something opened. Not only in the browser, but inside me. At that moment, I had no idea that I was taking the first step toward an invisible prison. A prison that no one could see, but that bound me inside day after day, with no visible handcuffs. No bars, no fanfare, but with a destructive power that, when I look back today, terrifies me. At first, it was spaced out, once here, once there, just to relieve stress, just to relax, while my wife didn't notice. While the children slept, while everything seemed normal on the outside, I continued preaching. I continued singing, I continued smiling at prayer meetings, but inside, my soul began to sicken. No one knew, not my wife, my pastor, or my closest friends, but God did, and deep down, so did I. Pornography didn't knock at the door with screams or promises. It came stealthily as if offering temporary solace, an escape route, pleasure at no cost, and I accepted it. I accepted it because it was easy, because it was safe, because no one saw it. But the price was high, and it was paid in silence. First, the emotional exhaustion, then the lack of interest in my wife, then the irritation without reason, the distancing, the glances that avoided hers. It was as if I were slowly separating from her even though we slept in the same bed, as if my mind was reprogramming itself without me realizing it. Because that's how it was. I could no longer focus on God. I couldn't pray. When I tried, images assaulted me like poison darts. When she spoke of spiritual things, I felt dirty, unworthy, impure, but still, I kept connecting. I kept coming back because it was no longer a choice, it was an addiction, a cycle, a prison, and perhaps worst of all, I believed I could control it, that one day I would suddenly stop doing it, but that's not how it worked. They break the chains, so the soul isn't freed. And if you've made it this far and understood what I'm talking about, if it's ever happened to you or someone you love, write the following sentence in the comments. I already knew about this invisible prison. Sometimes, just by admitting it, a key starts to turn, a chain begins to weaken, a light begins to shine inside. But what I didn't know was that innocent website, that hidden click, was just the initial invitation. What lay behind it was something much darker. And the first time I realized it, it was in the most terrifying way you can imagine. At first, it was almost imperceptible, small changes, almost invisible to the eyes of someone who has lived with her for years. But I knew it. I felt it. Every night, when I returned to the same room where she slept peacefully, the weight of my guilt mixed with a tiredness that didn't come from the body but from the soul. The desire was no longer the same, not because I had changed, on the contrary. I was still the same strong, sweet, and faithful woman, but because my gaze was contaminated. I had nurtured a kind of reality-distorting pleasure that distanced me from her, making me compare, criticize, and despise. Without realizing it was pornography that was corroding my marriage from within, I began to avoid touching her. Kisses became protocol, superficial conversations. And when she tried to get close, when she wanted to pray with me or simply share her heart, something inside me closed up. An inexplicable irritation. A discomfort with her lightness, with her purity. It was as if her clean, true spiritual presence revealed even more of the filth inside me, and I didn't know how to deal with it. Instead of confessing, I hid instead of opening my heart. I lashed out. I began treating her coldly. I distanced myself emotionally. I made excuses for not being home, and even when I was, it was as if I wasn't there. She noticed, of course, I was, but she didn't say anything, she just prayed, and that hurt me even more because every time she knelt, every time she saw that open Bible, that silent tear rolling down my face, I felt like I was facing a mirror that showed me exactly who he was, not a man of God, not a faithful husband, but an addict. Hiding behind a Christian facade. The worst part was that he never accused me, never raised his voice, never embarrassed me, and that made him even more unbearable because his patience embarrassed me. His love humbled me, and instead of breaking me, I hardened, became rude, distant, cold. The silence between us grew like an invisible wall, and every time I said it was okay, the lie grew stronger inside me. If you've ever experienced this emptiness at home, this distance that has no name but hurts like an open wound, write here in the comments. Silence also screams. Sometimes it's this kind of phrase that connects stories, that gives someone the courage to acknowledge what's still hidden, but no matter how hard I tried to maintain my composure, something inside me was already beginning to crumble, and what happened next was the first sign that there was something much darker behind what I imagined. It was late, the house was dark, I had just turned off the living room TV. Another night wasted in silence, pretending everything was under control. I walked slowly down the hallway, trying not to make a sound, but I stopped dead in my tracks when I heard a muffled sound coming from the bedroom, a whisper. A broken voice. I approached and realized it was her. My wife was on her knees, praying. It wasn't a pretty prayer, one of those we learned to repeat automatically. It was a cry, a clamor. It was as if she were giving away her own heart with all the strength she still had left, and the hardest part of all was hearing my name, amidst that clamor. Lord, I don't know what's wrong with him, but I feel him distant, cold, with a heavy heart. I don't know what's behind that, but you do. Free him, Jesus, Free my husband, take him out of the darkness, don't let our home die." I stayed still. A lump formed in my throat. It pierced me like an arrow because she was praying for something that even she didn't know, for sure. But I did know exactly what was holding me back. I knew what I was doing in secret. I knew what I was nursing in the darkness of my mind, and hearing her cry out with faith, with pain, with love was like a punch to the soul. But I didn't go in, I didn't hug her, I didn't confess. I returned slowly like a coward, shielding myself with my pride. I went to bed pretending to sleep, and when she came back to bed with her eyes red and her face still wet, I turned to the other side because I had the courage to confront her. The silence between us that morning was more deafening than any argument. There, I understood something. Hell doesn't begin after death. It begins here when we turn away from everything pure, true, and spiritual. And that night, without her knowing, my wife lit the first candle inside the dark cave where my soul was trapped. Have you ever heard a prayer like this? One that moved you in a way no one else has? If so, comment below. I heard a prayer that tore me apart inside. Sometimes it's this kind of memory that God uses to heal. And the strangest thing is, after that night, something began to change. Not in the marriage yet, but in me. But what would come next would show me that I was dealing with something much darker than a simple addiction. After that night when I heard my wife pray for me, something began to change, but not in the way I expected. It wasn't repentance, it wasn't conversion, it was restlessness, a growing discomfort. At first, I thought it was just guilt, but as time went on, of the days it began to take on a strange, almost living form. I began to have nightmares, and they weren't ordinary dreams. I would wake up in the middle of the night sweating profusely, my heart racing as if someone had shaken me hard. And the most disturbing thing was that almost always in my dreams there was a dark corner in the room, a place where the light didn't reach, and inside that place a faceless presence, voiceless but with eyes that watched me. I couldn't see them, but I felt them, and it was as if they were everyone knew about me, my desires, my lies, my weaknesses. I began to avoid that corner of the room. Even when I was awake, I circled around it. I turned on the light, lowered the TV volume, anything to avoid feeling that it was still there, but the feeling wouldn't go away. Sometimes I was home alone and felt a shiver run down my spine as if someone were behind me. Other times, I had my phone in my hand, about to return to that innocent website, and I felt a pressure so strong that my hand trembled. And then I realized it wasn't just desire, it wasn't just a man's curiosity. There was something spiritual pulling at my soul. A silent but active force. Something that didn't just want my attention, it wanted my destruction. It was as if every time I gave in to pornography, I opened a door, and on the other side was someone waiting, someone who smiled every time I fell back in. Do you know what scared me most? The realization that all of this started right after my wife's prayer. As if the light of her prayer had disturbed the darkness. That I fed as if the war had started right there and I were the battlefield. Have you ever felt this? That feeling that there's something spiritual behind what seems like just a habit? If so, comment below. I felt like it wasn't just desire, it was spiritual. Your experience could help someone who still struggles with this alone and doesn't stay there. Because there was a night when all of this stopped being just a feeling. I saw it with my own eyes, and that's what I'm going to tell you now. As the oppression grew in my house and my heart hardened more and more, I continued to feed that addiction like someone feeding a monster, alone in my room in the middle of the night, with the lights off and headphones on. That's where I thought no one could see me. That it was just me and the screen, which was just me, once again, just a few minutes. But that night, something happened that to this day gives me goosebumps. Just remembering it, it was around 2 a.m. My wife was already asleep. I got up slowly and my phone went silent and I approached the living room sofa. The same ritual as always. I opened the browser, accessed any website, chose a video, and started playing it, but in the middle of the scene, suddenly the screen froze. At first, I thought it was just the connection. I waited for it to load, but the frozen image began to distort. Little by little, the colors darkened, and the features of the woman's face in the video began to distort. Her eyes, which had previously been looking elsewhere, turned directly toward me, and then it was as if everything around me disappeared. Her eyes, or rather, hers, stared at me, cold and dark, lifeless, but full of a kind of awareness, as if they knew I was there, as if they had been waiting for me. My body froze. The sound cut out, and for an eternal moment, the face on the screen transformed. Completely, it wasn't human, it was a demonic face in disguise, emerging from the pornography to reach me. That creature, he glared at me, as if to say, "Now you're mine." I threw my phone away, trembling. I turned everything off, turned off the Wi-Fi, and left the room as if I were fleeing a fire. The air felt heavy. I felt as if something had entered my house, as if it had gone through the screen, as if it were here now, watching me. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat on the floor of my room, afraid to even close my eyes. It was as if I finally realized this was never just a habit, it was a spiritual trap. And I had given in voluntarily. If this touched you in any way, if you've ever been through something similar, comment here with the phrase "Now I understand what it really was." It may seem strange, but your courage to comment could be the beginning of someone's liberation, and I don't think it would stop there, because the next morning something even stranger happened, something that proved to me that my wife already knew that morning. After what I saw on the screen, I kept trying to convince myself that it was just tiredness, lack of sleep, or overwork. My mind was creating images where I didn't know it. I kept telling myself, "Damn, that's only in other people's heads. I don't believe in these things." But at night, I paid the price for my disbelief. It was a little after 3 in the morning, the same time I always woke up, my face drenched in sweat, as if I'd run a marathon in a nightmare. Only this time, I couldn't even get up. I opened my eyes, and the room was completely dark, darker than usual. A darkness that seemed alive. I heard a dull noise, like a raspy whisper, coming from the corner of the room. Then I saw it. A dark figure standing there, staring at me. My whole body froze. I tried to get up, but I couldn't. I felt the mattress sink right next to me, as if someone had sat down there. It wasn't my wife. She was still sleeping motionless, as if she didn't feel anything, but I felt everything. An absurd weight on my chest kept me from breathing properly. It was like if invisible hands were pressing me down on the bed. I tried to scream, but my voice wouldn't come out. I tried to move my legs and arms, but nothing responded. I was awake, conscious but paralyzed, and in that silent darkness, I realized this wasn't psychological, it was spiritual. The figure approaching had no face, just a shadow, and even without eyes, I knew they were watching me. A shiver ran down my spine, and in that instant, a truth ripped apart inside me. I was exposed not only by pornography but by everything I carried hidden, my contaminated heart, my unconfessed sin, the absence of God in me. The door was open, and they knew it. When I finally managed to move, I fell to the floor. Shaking, crying, and for the first time in a long time, I murmured a weak prayer. Formless, but it was all I could say. God help me. If you've ever experienced something similar, if you've ever felt a presence watching you while your life was steeped in sin, comment here. I didn't know it was spiritual. You can be sure your experience could open your eyes. Someone today, but it wasn't just that night. What happened in the following days showed me that I was fighting a war and that the battlefield was my own home. It happened on a normal afternoon. I was home alone. I had argued with my wife before, and as always, I locked myself in the room with my cell phone in my hand, looking for the typical dirty relief. But this time, my body began to shake. A cold sweat ran down the back of my neck. I felt a tightness in my chest like never before. I tried to get up, but it was as if my legs had disappeared. Everything went dark. I fell to the ground with force. I still remember hitting my head against the floor. I tried to call someone, but I couldn't even breathe, and then everything stopped. The sound, the light, the time. My heart simply stopped beating. The doctors said that after about 3 minutes, what I experienced there seemed like an eternity. I woke up in a place that was not this world. It had no walls, no roof, no color. It was like being underground, but with no ground around me. A dry, arid valley. The air was heavy, and in the background, I heard screams that didn't come from one place. They were everywhere, and each scream seemed to contain a pain I didn't know a soul could bear. I tried to run, but my feet sank into a kind of dark dust, as if everything there was dragging me down. The sky didn't exist, only dense shadows moving slowly like living smoke. And every time I tried to look ahead, something made me look inside. It was as if that place revealed everything I was trying to hide. Every lie, every vice, every dirty thought. Every disregard for my wife's faith. Everything there was alive, burning inside. And then I understood. That place was real. It wasn't a dream. It wasn't a hallucination. It was the reflection of my soul. A place where God's light doesn't enter. An echo of hell. And I was there. Maybe you think it's an exaggeration. That it's an invention. But I ask you, are you sure your sins aren't taking you there, too? If this moves you, comment below. I don't want to know that place. It may seem like a simple phrase, but it could be the first step towards liberation for someone who accompanies you in silence, because what I saw next was worse than any scream, and I'll remember it forever. I don't know how my feet moved. I walked, but I didn't know where. It was as if the valley itself was taking me. And then I heard a voice. It wasn't coming from outside, it was coming from within. A voice saying, "Here are those who have hidden their sins." That phrase hit me like a sword, and suddenly I began to see faces. They weren't strangers, they were people I knew. Some were from my old church, others I followed on social media. People who preached, who sang, who smiled at Sunday services. But there were no more smiles, only empty eyes, empty like bottomless pits. They stood still, as if trapped within themselves. Their bodies were covered in a kind of grey smoke that seemed to cling to their skin like shame incarnate. There was no fire, but the pain was visible. It was a moral pain, a pain of the soul. As if each of them were consumed by the weight of everything they had never confessed. One was crying without tears, another was trembling with clenched teeth. They all had something in common. Their eyes didn't blink and seemed to look directly at me, as if they knew I was hiding it too. I approached a man. His face looked familiar. He was a respected leader in the church, a family man. I remember hearing him preach once, using such beautiful words about the repentance, but now he stood there with his hands crossed over his chest as if trying to contain something bleeding inside. He looked at me, and in that look I understood. He had never confessed. He had never exposed himself. He lived like me, seemingly afraid of the shame of men but blind to God's judgment. With every step, more faces appeared. A woman singing praises. A pastor whom everyone praised. A young soul leader. All there, burning in silence. And that voice returned. Here they are. Those who have hidden their sins. In that moment, I wanted to scream, run, disappear. But the earth seemed to draw me in, as if the valley knew me. As if it knew I, too, was wearing a mask. And the worst part was, I began to hear phrases that sounded like mine. It's just a small sin. No one has to find out. I can control myself. I can stop whenever I want. That tore me apart inside. Have you ever wondered if someone you admire, or even yourself, could be here in this place? If this passage moved you, comment below. I don't want you to define themselves in the valley of shame, but what lay ahead was something I could never have imagined, and then I stopped. In the middle of that valley, there was something that stood out among everything, a mirror, but it wasn't ordinary. It was ancient, framed with something that looked like burnt bone, and it didn't reflect appearances, but the truth. I approached with fear, as if something inside me already knew what I was about to see. When my eyes met that reflection, a shiver ran through my body. That was me, but not as I saw myself in the world, it was as God saw me. My face was pale, my eyes dull with deep dark circles, and my skin was blackened by something that felt like coal and shame, but the worst part was the chains tied to my chest like sharp claws that dug into the flesh of my soul. Chains with names: occultism, addiction, lies, pride. I wanted to look back, to run away, but the mirror wouldn't let me. It was as if I were alive, as if it forced me to see the rot I had carried for years, even when I went to the church, even when he was preaching, even when he was pretending to be fine. Then I heard her, not just any voice, but hers, firm, full of pain but also authority, and she said, "While you thought everything was pleasure, hell was watching you." In that moment, everything made sense. Those eyes on the screen, that presence in the room, the nightmares weren't just flesh, it wasn't just impulse, it was spiritual, it was a pact, it was an alliance. Sin wasn't just what I did in secret, it was what connected me to a realm that pretended not to exist, and the most terrifying thing was every time I said just one more time, I tightened those chains even more. Every click, every impure thought, every lie I told my wife and myself was a contract signed with hell, and now I saw it all. And have you ever stopped to really look at yourself? Have you had the courage to look at yourself in the spiritual mirror? If this moment moved you, write here in the comments, "God, show me who I really am," because this prayer can be the beginning of your liberation. But the most shocking thing was yet to come. I still didn't understand why God had brought me there until I looked to my left and the voice was getting closer. It wasn't just firm, it was sacred, it was just, and it cut like a sword. It didn't scream, but its presence crushed everything. I trembled and heard with complete clarity. "Having given your eyes to the enemy," I froze. I tried to justify it. "As always, Lord. It was just an image. I never touched anyone. I never cheated." But before I could finish, the memories began to appear before me. Not as thoughts, but as scenes projected there around me. Every click, every search, every mental repetition I made in Soledad. Every time my gaze strayed, it fueled fantasies, while saying that everything was under control. It was as if hell had recorded everything from the beginning. And I saw the faces of the women I had desired with my eyes. Faces I didn't remember, and behind each one, shadows that fed on my weakness. And in that spiritual tribunal, I understood. My record was my contract. Pornography wasn't just a bad practice. It was a door, an offering, an altar built with eyes, and hell accepted every sacrifice. You have consecrated your eyes. You have sealed your soul with an unholy desire. You have renounced purity and you have lied to yourself, the voice said. By denying that it was a sin, you have agreed to be a servant of something that hated you. I wept for the first time. I truly cried, not out of fear but out of shame. Because while my wife prayed for me, I hid while my children held me up as an example. I was a slave to images. Even though I said, "I am of God," my actions said otherwise. There, in that trial, I realized something I had never understood. Hell doesn't accuse with lies, it accuses with truths that one has tried to forget. And if this touches you now, if in some way this exposes something inside you, write in the comments. God clears my story. But even in that valley, something even more devastating than all the revelations awaited me. One broke my heart in a way I will never forget. In the midst of that tribunal of pain, something unexpected began to happen deep in the valley, amid screams and shadows. A voice pierced the air. It wasn't an accusation, it was a prayer. A prayer that pierced the darkness like a ray of light. A familiar voice, trembling, fragile, but full of faith. It was my wife's voice. She said, "Lord, save him. Even if he doesn't ask, free his heart." I know that. There is still salvation. It tore me apart inside. How could I pray for myself after everything, after what I hid, after so much coldness, so much indifference, so much silence? At that moment, I fell to my knees. If it were true, it was possible to kneel in that place, and while hell displayed my sins like a trophy, her intercession began to accomplish the impossible. A wind whipped through the valley. The voices ceased, and a light, at first dim, began to illuminate me. It wasn't warm, but it was alive. It was mercy taking form. And I heard another voice. This time, from above, not one of judgment, but of love. She didn't give up. With you, and because she prayed, I heard her. In that moment, everything around me began to tremble. The chains creaked. The pain was still real. But there was something different. A kind of tearing in reality, as if heaven were opening a path through hell. It was a portal, a calling. And then I understood, whoever prays with faith can break even the oldest pacts, the most hidden vices, the most shameful sins, because God always listens. I wanted to scream, but my voice didn't come out. Only tears. Because the prayer of a woman who loved me more than I deserved was pulling me out of the clutches of hell. Not because deserved but for grace. If you still pray for someone even though it seems impossible, right below, do I still pray for him or her? God hears you more than you can imagine. And it was there, under that growing light, that I realized something was about to change. But what came next was deeper than any hell. I woke up with white lights on the ceiling. A continuous beeping filled the room. The doctors' voices were saying things I barely understood. I was in the hospital, alive, but something inside me had died, and at the same time, something had been born. For days, I didn't say a word. My wife sat with me in silence, trying to understand. All I did was cry. I cried so hard that my throat burned. It wasn't physical pain, it was shame. It was heaviness. It was the echo of everything I had seen, of everything that was inside me. They said I had a heart attack and almost died. But how can I explain that I went beyond that? That I saw hell? That I tasted damnation? That I heard my name echoing in the mouths of demons? It wasn't possible, and I didn't want to look her in the eyes. How could I face a woman who prayed for my soul while I desired others on the screen? How could I explain to her that behind that addiction was a real entity, a spirit that wanted to destroy my marriage, my future, and my salvation? So I stayed silent. I spent days avoiding any kind of conversation. I refused to touch my cell phone, even avoiding the mirror, because I knew that the vision of the man in chains, with darkened eyes and a dirty soul, was still me inside. My wife, not understanding what was happening, cried with me. She didn't know what she had seen, and yet she was still there. I remember one morning when I woke up, went to the bathroom, and looked at my hands. I asked in a low voice, "Lord, why did you let me come back?" Perhaps those listening to this right now have already felt something similar. A weight that no one sees, a sorrow that screams in silence. If so, comment below. I know what it's like to feel this way. You are not alone, and it's not the end yet. Because even when everything seemed broken, God continued to write a new story in my life. It took me days, maybe weeks. But there came a time when keeping everything to myself began to hurt more than revealing it. I felt broken. Inside, the silence became an abyss between us, and I understood that if God brought me back, I couldn't keep hiding everything, so I sat down in front of her. Her hands were shaking, her heart was beating fast. I looked into the eyes of the woman who had always been by my side, even without understanding, even without knowing what was happening. I confessed. I began to talk about my addiction, how pornography had become part of my routine, how I hid, how I lied even to myself. She remained silent, her eyes fixed on me, but I continued. I spoke of the spiritual attacks, of the evil presence of the night when the screen froze, of the demonic face of the dreams, of the shadows of the weight. Then, in a broken voice, I told her about hell. I described the valley, the screams, the chains, the mirror, the shame. I told her I saw my own name echoing. In that place, I told her I heard accusations no one had ever heard. I told her I saw other men, people from the church living on the surface, burning inside. Finally, I said I heard a voice, A prayer, hers, that it was her prayer that opened the portal, that it was her faith that God used to bring me back. In that moment,